This is the podcast where you introduce us.
Yeah, I know. Thanks for starting that with Rivers. So that's fun. Welcome to the Binc Film Podcast. I'm Holly, your guest, and this is Gordon Berg, our host. And this evening, we're going to be speaking about Lord of the Rings.
It's really weird for people to be into movie soundtracks.
Yeah, I heard that you thought that.
It is. It's even weird for me. But, so my point is, why are you weird?
Because I was born that way. Yeah.
That's a lame answer.
No. I got no other answer.
So when was the first time you were like, wow, that music's really cool?
So I think the first time I really paid attention to movie soundtracks was Tarzan from Disney with Phil Collins. I think that was the first epiphany where I was like, oh shit.
I remember
this music is fantastic.
My brother had the physical CD of that soundtrack.
Well, then he and I have that in common.
He probably doesn't remember, but he would play it in his CD player in his room. And it was really good, except for that one song where it's like a bunch of sound effects compiled together turning into a song. Do you remember that?
Yeah, is that
horrible.
the pan one where
I
they're
think
just
so, yeah. Isn't there like a typewriter or something in there?
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the song, but it's just them making a bunch of noise. It's like Trash in the Camp. I think that's actually the name of the song, Trash in the Camp.
Sounds about right.
And I can't remember who it was. It's like Whoopi Goldberg or somebody plays the little gorilla in the scene. And yeah, the whole song comes on to play after that. But it's just super awkward.
When was the last time you saw that movie?
Probably 5 years ago. It's been
that recent?
While. Yeah, that recent.
It's been a while?
Yeah, well, yeah. But it's it was, within probably 5 years. And yeah.
Is it still good?
Oh, yeah. It holds up.
Does it, though, or is it just nostalgia?
I mean, it could be both, but I feel like it still holds up. Phil Collins is great all the time. And that went mainstream. People who hadn't even seen the movie. It was kind of like Lion King.
Mm-hmm.
How those soundtracks, hit the top 40 pop charts, and they just took off, and people didn't even watch the movie, but they're like, I love that song. I feel like that was Phil Collins.
So what other soundtracks when you were younger?
The Matrix stands out. I know that came out when I was pretty young.
The only thing I remember from that soundtrack is that little horn thing that it does. When he's doing slow motion every time.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounds like there's a car going by, but it's actually instruments. That's all I remember from that soundtrack.
Yeah, it's so electro, especially the second movie, Reloaded, I think.
Great CGI in that movie.
Yeah, especially now. That really holds up nowadays.
That holds up.
Yeah. That's when they do the pile, when all the Agent Smiths pile on him, in that park or whatever. It's the most disgusting CGI you've ever seen in your life. And it's why did they ever release this and be yeah, that's fine?
What's even worse is I have this memory of when I stayed home sick once from school, and you'd look through the DVDs and you'd put a DVD in, and I'm like, yeah, Matrix. And I remember getting to that scene and being like, oh, I remember how awesome this was. But even on that rewatch, I still thought it was awesome. And then probably 10 years ago, I went back and watched that scene, and I was like, this is so... It looks like they have paper plates on their faces with just someone just drawing eyes in a mouth. It's so bad.
I loved the MTV Movie Awards, to throw back to that, in 2000, whatever the hell year it was. They did a spoof of it with, his first name is Sean, but he's Stifler from American Pie.
Sean William Scott.
Yeah.
Sean William Scott.
Yeah, and so it was him and somebody else. It might have been Justin Timberlake, but they did spoofs of The Matrix, and it was that movie. And so they were Sean Pyle, and just making fun of the crappy CGI. That was probably one of the funniest opens I've seen for any kind of award show. But I was like, thank God they made fun of that, because it was really bad.
You know what movie?
They even knew when it came out that it was bad. It was like The Scorpion King. like in the second Mummy movie, where everybody just knew it was like the worst CGI they've ever seen, and they still somehow were just like, yeah, we're still gonna release this because people are gonna watch it anyways. It's like whatever.
I loved those Mummy movies as a kid.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
I heard a rumor a while ago that they're doing another one.
Yeah, so I follow multiple Mummy like fan pages on Facebook.
Why?
And Brendan Fraser like meme pages, and yeah, people go absolutely nuts over that crap, and they're just super pumped with even just like the concept that a fourth Mummy movie could come out. To be honest, I've never seen the third one, the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
Oh, yeah.
I never actually saw that one because the first and second were too good, and then they replaced Evie, and I was like, I can't deal with that. So I never gave it a chance, but...
You were like, I can't deal with this. I'm just joining the fan pages.
Yeah, I'm just going to relive the glory that was the 1999 cinematic masterpiece that is The Mummy with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz.
I think that we will look back on the early 2000s like older people look back at the 70s.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Like, for movies and music and life in general. Like, internet was there, but it was kind of...
Yeah, it was still, like, in its infancy, so it wasn't, like, a big deal.
Or you'd use it in school and you hated it.
Yeah, or you're like, yeah, didn't understand the full power of it back then. It was just like...
I feel like there wasn't really much power back then.
It was just like a digital encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Like... Instead of going to the library and manually looking up the book that I gotta find, I can go to this little web search thing and find it on the shelf that way. Super helpful.
So, speaking of early 2000s, Lord of the Rings, the first time you watched that, did the music stick out to you?
Yes.
Do you remember which part in particular?
I don't know, like every part. So I was thinking about this earlier today because so Howard Shore and whoever was all involved in the orchestra that built the soundtrack for that movie, they had such distinct scores built for like every major moment and every major like location within Middle Earth. And so like it all stood out. And I think that's why everybody loves the Peter Jackson films so much versus any other iteration of Middle Earth that we've seen so far. Yeah, they weren't perfect as far as films go. They cut out a lot of content.
Yes, they were.
I mean, a lot of people got beef about Tom Bombadil being cut out and stuff.
I'm glad he's not in that movie.
Yeah, he was an anomaly. He was a weird anomaly in the book that nobody can really explain to this day. He doesn't have, like, defined, like, what was he. Like, he's still a mystery character. But overall, the reason that everybody loves those movies, I think, has a lot to do with just the total package. And without the music being as strong as it was, I think it would have hurt it a lot. We'll talk more about the Rings of Power later.
Yes, we will. I had Christmas after The Return of the King came out, and my parents were asking me what I wanted for Christmas, and I put the soundtrack for The Return of the King. And this was back when they would sell things like that at Target, and I got that. We were going to my grandma's house for Christmas, and they had us open a couple presents in the morning or whatever. And it was that soundtrack, so I had my CD player with the headphones and everything, and I put that in, and it was, I think, track 3. And it's where Gandalf is climbing the levels of Minas Tirith, and the music just keeps climbing and climbing as he's going. And I remember I listened to it like 20 times in a row, and I thought it was so cool, and I just kept turning the volume up more and more. And one of my brothers ended up making fun of me because he thought it was just like the weirdest thing that I was listening to that. Like, why are you listening to a movie soundtrack on a CD?
Just jamming out.
Yeah, but it was awesome.
It is awesome. So one of my favorite tracks that I have on my playlist from Lord of the Rings is the Rohirrim like theme.
Yep.
And anything with Rohan. That's like the peak my favorites, I think, within all 3 movie soundtracks.
Well, the thing that he did really interesting with that movie is he changes the instrumentation throughout as things happen. So, for example, when you hear the Concerning Hobbits melody at the beginning, it's played on a penny whistle. And by the end of the journey, when they return back home, it's being played on actual flutes. So it's like sort of representing their growth. It's no longer like this childish, playful thing. Now it's like...
very complex.
Yeah, and adult and grown and matured and everything.
And complicated.
And he does that same thing with the Rohan theme, where the first time you hear it, if I remember correctly, is when they first arrive.
And the flag rips
Yep,
off,
and it
which
blows
was
away.
accidental.
There's so many cool accidental things in that movie.
Like every Lord of the Rings page that I'm part of always has like the memes about people who are Lord of the Rings freaks pointing out all that crap while you're watching the movie with somebody else because you can't keep your mouth shut.
Yep.
And my favorite ones are like when Viggo breaks his toe.
Yeah, he kicks the helmet.
And everybody's like, did you know that Viggo broke his toe when he kicked that away?
That scream was real. Yeah. It's like, cool.
And they're like, and we're like, oh my God, it's so awesome. Did you watch the behind the scenes full extended versions of the DVDs?
And they're like, no, I'm not on the fan pages.
And I'm like, I can't even watch them and recognize what scenes aren't in the non-extended version because I only watched the theatrical releases in the theater when they were first released. Mm-hmm. And then ever since then, I've only watched my extended editions.
Yeah, I'll never watch the theatrical one again.
Yeah, and so I can't even tell people the difference, like what's been added to the extended edition because I just don't even remember what was cut out of the theatrical version to be like, yeah, that's added. I
think the biggest ones were the Mouth of Sauron.
Oh, yeah, that was an add-on, wasn't it?
Yep. And
there was a scene with Aragorn and Arwen when they're in...
Did you say Aragorn?
Oh my God, did I? Aragorn?
Thank you for watching this podcast.
Yeah,
this podcast is over.
We tripped over to another fantasy genre there.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of like... I mean, that's the thing is it's little... For the most part, it's little scenes here and there that just add to everything. But then they
fill out the book information a little bit more.
Yeah. Then they ended up doing The Hobbit. What'd you think of that?
I didn't hate it as much as I feel like a lot of people did. I still just enjoyed it because it's more content to consume. Mm-hmm. I wish I could say the same thing for Rings of Power. I tried my best.
Well, we'll get to that.
But no, The Hobbit, it definitely wasn't, like, it was so much more lighthearted, but it was also like the original children's book. So I get why they made it a little bit more fantastical and silly, but it just felt so strange coming off of, like, what was the power of the Lord of the Rings trilogy leading up to that point. So when you compare the two, they're on totally different levels, but it was still fun to watch. So I don't know, I don't hate on it, but it definitely could have been a better experience. And there was they went a little wild with CGI on that one where, like, that's the great thing about the first trilogy is that all of that CGI holds up.
It's because
like, really
most
good.
of it was practical effects.
Yeah, even the flame from the Balrog was, like, legit flame because they didn't have the software yet to actually produce that type of CGI.
I will say the elephant with Legolas riding it looks almost as bad as that Matrix scene we were talking about.
Yeah, that's pretty rough, especially when he goes sliding off the trunk and he's like whipping back and forth. Yeah, that's pretty...
But, I mean, at that time, that was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I think that the third Hobbit movie just kind of left a bad taste in everyone's mouth.
Yeah.
Because I saw the first one, and it obviously wasn't the same as Lord of the Rings, because it's not the Lord of the Rings. But I really liked it. The second one, I actually love the second one, still to this day. I really like that movie. I don't know, the whole, like, they're already in the middle of the journey, so you're not doing all the beginning stuff. They're going through like the creepy dark forest, and Gandalf is like doing this investigation thing. And I will say the music didn't seem as inspired maybe as the original one. However, that main theme, I think it's called like Underhill or something like that.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
It's like the main Hobbit theme.
Yeah.
It's so good, and nobody talks about it. The Misty Mountain song too that they sing, like, it's a really good song. But again, I think that third movie just kind of ruined it for everyone. On top of the CGI, it just kind of left people like, meh.
Yeah. Well, and I think they stretched it out and they didn't need to make it into 3 movies. I know they were trying to add like the appendices and like a lot of the history of Middle Earth, little snippets that could have been coinciding with what was taking place during that time. So I get what they were trying to do, but I feel like they stretched it a little too thin, and they ended it in a really weird spot with between the second and the third movie. So it was like weird that they decided to end it before he attacks the town, because that was like a huge buildup. And then that major scene happens right at the beginning of the third movie. And then it was like really dull for a very long time in the third movie. And then it builds up to the Battle of the 5 Armies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's just like a bunch of people just kind of show up.
Yeah.
And then it's like this giant CGI orgy for like 2 hours.
That white orc.
And yeah, it just kind of, it just wasn't, it felt like a forced sort of climax at the end. I don't know. It just.
Yeah, it's like the complexity that was put into the first 3 movies, they kind of skipped out on for the Hobbit movies. And so they could have done so much more with practical effect, and they decided to do just CGI, which I don't understand. Like, I know that Weta Digital is amazing, but
I remember
practical,
hearing.
you just can't replace practical.
No, you can't. I remember hearing that. I may be remembering this wrong, so nobody quote me on this.
I'm going to judge the shit out of you right now.
I remember hearing something about Peter Jackson, because they used like a different frame rate or something.
Okay.
Which is what made the CGI look kind of weird. And I remember reading something about how he was saying that he felt like the industry was moving in this direction. And so he wanted it to age well because of that.
I think it was 60 frames per second.
60 frames per second?
I think so.
Yeah, it was something like that. But and I think it still does look really good, but it's just very obviously CGI.
Right.
You know, you watch the original Lord of the Rings, and yeah, maybe some of the makeup didn't age super well, but it's like that's a person standing there. That's an actual physical person.
Mm-hmm.
And you see a lot of these shows and movies now that use this stagecraft thing. You know about that?
Are you talking about like the volume?
Yeah, where it's got the screens
Yeah, it's
all
just
the
like
way
a
around.
massive LED
Yeah.
screen.
And it looks incredible, but you can feel it when you watch the movie. So like the perfect example of this would be the new Ant-Man movie.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
They shrink down into the quantum realm, and so everything's huge, but the camera is just like always so up close and narrow on them. You can tell that they're acting in just this confined space, because it's like the whole movie is done on that stage, and it's only so big, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool, but you can feel it when you watch the movie. You can feel that these aren't real sets. And then when you see a scene like in The Mandalorian, they use that all the time.
Yeah.
And then there was an episode in season 2, I believe, towards the end, they're out in this open area shooting, fighting some people. I think Boba Fett shows up or something. And they used a real set, and you can clearly like feel that this is a big open space and that's real.
Right.
So it's cool, but at the same time, it kind of takes away from it a little bit when the whole movie's done on that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should be used as a tool when you can benefit the actors in a confined space to be able to provide them with a really realistic looking scene around them that they can react to instead of green screen. So if you want to replace green screen with that, perfect.
Right.
But if you're going to replace practical sets that you would normally have built instead of that, just because you have this super expensive LED screen that you built that takes up an entire warehouse.
It's probably a lot cheaper. That's probably why they do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's got to be expensive to run like that complicated equipment and sync.
But think about how many people you need. You don't have to scout locations. You don't have to transport people. You don't have to find places for them to sleep. You don't have to cater out into the middle of nowhere or do any of that stuff. You just go down to the studio and show up for your shift for 19 hours or whatever they're filming before they go on strike.
I was going to say that's probably why they're on strike
Yeah.
right now, because the people who are creating the graphics that have to render this entire 3D environment that the camera pairs with, they're probably getting paid like $8.50 an hour.
Yeah, there's actually...
And that's why they're all striking right now.
There's this whole controversy with the CGI, the companies that do all these practical effects, because basically what happens is companies like Marvel or Disney rather will say, hey, we have this thing that we need to make, and they essentially auction it off to these different companies for the lowest bidder, and then they take it, and then they're like, yeah, we need that done by this date, which is not enough time, and also we have 12 more projects, and then all these companies get slammed with CGI, and that's supposedly why CGI has gotten so bad lately, is because there aren't physically enough companies out there to take on all this work. And then when they do take on the work, they're not only underpaid, but the deadlines they're given aren't far enough out, so they have to end up rushing it. And then you end up with terrible CGI, and now there's actually rumors that these companies might be forming a union as well. So there might just be like a complete chaos in Hollywood.
Yeah, I saw that. I can't remember which company the people decided to or voted to unionize, and it's like groundbreaking. It might have been Disney or something, but it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But they definitely are underpaid. It's ridiculous. When you can just make movie magic like that happen with very little effort, all you need is a really high-powered computer, and you're getting paid shit to do it, and that's what makes or breaks the entire, like, feel and vibe of the film when you have really, really poor CGI inserted in there. It, like, completely takes you out of the whole, like, setting. And so when you break that, it's just, yeah. And then they're getting paid trash to do it.
What'd you think about the CGI on Rings of Power?
It was... So I know that they broke the record for the most money spent on a show. And I think a lot of that probably had to do with some of the CGI and everything that they accomplished with the way it looked, because it was beautiful. Like, that's one of the things I can give to that show, is that it was absolutely stunning to look at. Too bad that they didn't put that much effort into the plot and the characters. But yeah, I don't know. Like, it was beautiful. Like, that was the one thing I had going for it. I was like, this is absolutely stunning. Like, if Peter Jackson could have had that kind of budget to rock that first, like, series, or even to use that in The Hobbit, oh, man. Like, that would have been insane. But it almost seemed like a waste to a certain point, because it was like, you spent all that just to make it pretty, and then we got, like...
I actually...
That's how I feel about it.
I actually fell asleep multiple times watching that show, because here's the thing. Huge Lord of the Rings dork, obviously. I'm like, oh, Amazon's doing it. I don't know how I feel about this. Let's watch it. And I sit down to watch it, and I just was so bored.
Yeah.
Like, at the end of the day, there's some really... like you said, amazing CGI. The music is, I would say it's nowhere near what Howard Shore did.
No.
But it's still good. And I don't know if you know who did the music for that.
I don't.
Bear McCreary. And the most recent thing that he did was the new God of War games. So he's huge right now. He's a really good composer. But it just... was so boring to watch.
Yeah, it was super boring to watch, and like the music, even though it was like... So I would say the music was strong, but it wasn't like engaging. It didn't make me feel anything. Like the whole time I was watching it, I felt like the music was trying to tell me how I should feel during this scene, but the emotions just weren't there. Like, the performances were lackluster. Like, I didn't care about the characters. I didn't really care about the plot. And so the music would be, like, really swelling up to be, like, this fantastical moment to try and make you feel like you should feel really, like, emotional in this moment of this scene, but you just felt absolutely nothing. So the music was just swelling for no reason. You're just like, yeah, I don't care.
It made it seem like the music didn't fit, but the music was doing its job. It's just I don't know if that's like a directing thing or just the performance itself, but I was on the internet and I saw somebody post something about why isn't the Rings of Power soundtrack getting more attention? Why isn't it, winning awards and whatever? And I read that and I'm like, I'm curious to see what you think about this. I'm like, it's because the show wasn't good. And I know that sucks for the composer and everyone that worked in the music department, but would you agree that to an extent, if a show is so underwhelming and disappointing, the music is going to suffer as a consequence of that? Because people aren't going to see a movie and be like, you know what, that soundtrack is so good. The movie was terrible.
I would say there are instances where the movie's not fantastic, but you will notice a song that's been really well produced, and you're like, oh, wow, that was actually great. But the movie sucked. I don't feel like the music from Rings of Power was so amazing that it made up for the lack of performance.
I agree.
And that's the problem, because, like, they complement each other. Like, you have really powerful performances, like, characters that you care about, the story arcs are really interesting, and then the movie, or, like, the audio just backs it up and just compounds it, so it's all more powerful together. When one is lacking, the other one either has to be so amazing that it makes up for the crappy acting or crappy plot, and it just didn't have that going for it. Like, it was good music, and if there was good acting, yeah, they would have been, like, on par with each other.
I think a perfect example of that is Game of Thrones, where the earlier seasons, those themes come in, and you're like, yes. And then you get to season 7 and 8, and you're like, oh, it's the Targaryen theme.
Yeah.
And then the Night King's like slow motion walking for 45 minutes. And you're like, yeah, this is pretty exciting.
In the dark, and you couldn't even see it.
Yeah. I think that's him. I don't know exactly who that is.
Like, what the hell is even happening in this episode?
Where's
Jon Snow? Where the hell is he?
I still remember watching that. I remember where I was, and I was so excited, even though I felt like that show died in season 7. But
I would agree.
I was watching that episode, and I was so excited and, like, nervous, because you're like, this is it.
Yeah.
This is what we've been waiting for.
This is the big battle.
And then you're like, oh, my God, Sam's going to... Oh, no, he's fine. And then you're like, oh, Brienne's going to die. Oh, she's fine? I thought she just got eaten. Like, literally looked like she was getting eaten. I guess
and then all of a sudden she was off the side of it.
Yeah.
Also, I got to make a note that I'm really happy that these are, like, becoming a thing, but, like, cinematic score concerts, even if it's not the original orchestra playing it or even, like, the original people, like, they're having these basically concert events, but all it is movie score.
Yeah, I went to
and I'm like, yes, it's a win for
Game
the nerds.
Of Thrones.
Was it one of the candlelight ones, or was it like
no? It was
just like a.
It was the actual composer went on tour, and they had like a bunch of the musicians that performed on it, and they had screens showing scenes from the movies and like things falling from the ceiling. It was ridiculous. But
that makes me jealous.
Yeah. Anyway, would you...
Especially because Game of Thrones is, like, one of my favorite composers. Ramin Djawadi. Yeah.
Would you like to do an outro? Scratch that. Do the outro.
No.
It's part of the rules.
What am I supposed to say?
You're supposed to say, thank you for watching the Binc Film podcast.
Catch us on social. Good job, Eric.
Yeah, but you have to say the whole thing.
Nope, all done.
You were supposed to do another episode with us, right?
Nope.
Oh,
That was
okay.
it. One and done.
Well, in that case, thank you for tuning into the Binc Film Podcast. My name is Eric Gordon Berg. You can check us out.
Check us
Check
out.
us out on social media. And the guest here does not get named because she did not participate.
Except they already heard my name right in the beginning.
We'll cut that out.
Bye.
See you next time.